Welcome to the SimTech podcast, the podcast that looks behind the scenes of clinical simulation and speaks to people shaping how we train, learn, and innovate. In this episode, we're diving into the world of AI driven communication and virtual humans. I'm joined by Guy from Charisma.ai, a platform that uses interactive avatars to create realistic, conversation based simulations. We'll be exploring how AI characters can be used in healthcare education, simulation training, and beyond, from communication skills and decision making to realism, body language, and emotional responses. We'll also be talking about what it takes to build believable virtual interactions and the challenges of using AI simulation and where this technology could take us next. Whether you're a simulation technician, educator, or just curious about how AI is changing the way we simulate human interaction, this episode offers a fascinating look at what's possible when technology meets training. So, let's jump into it. Hello, and welcome back to another episode at the SimTech podcast. Today, we're going behind the scenes and looking at another supplier showcase. And to do that, I've brought along a very special guest. Give yourself what I call a corporate introduction.
Hi, everyone. Great to be here. My name is Guy Gadney. I run a company called Charisma.ai.
And I kind of discovered you on one of my monthly networking meetings with other crazy AI, XR enthusiasts. How did that go for you, Guy? I know there was a lot of questions and a lot of positivity around what you were doing. Did you get many follow-up emails pestering you?
A couple, and you know what? I think it's about quality, not quantity, actually. And what
Yeah.
we're finding with the simulation space and AI space that we work in, and for listeners, the bit that we've always focused in on is simulating conversations with characters, with people. And so imagine, if you will, you as a participant, as a user, might walk into a bar or a room or whatever it is, and uh, there are multiple virtual characters in that room. It could be a boardroom that you've just walked into to simulate that. It could be, as I said, a bar. It could be a really tense scenario. It could be, a negotiation situation. All of these. And so what really inspires me is when those situations are interesting, and someone comes to me who says, "Oh, I've got this." We had one the other day where, which was in VR, where someone wanted to recreate a boardroom situation, but the person who's going in switches gender. So rather than being a blokey bloke walking into a scenario, actually you're a bloke, in real life, but you become female as you walk in. And the point is to see that social environment, that boardroom situation, as someone from different gender might experience it. I thought that's such an interesting sort of use case. So for us, it's all about simulating the conversations. And often, by the way, Craig, it's about simulating them in a safe space, because some of the conversations, I mean, whatever they are, whether it's something like I don't know, you're going for you're trying to negotiate a pay rise or your annual review, you got one shot at it. It's really quite a nerve-wracking thing. So to be able to simulate that in a safe space is good fun as much as anything. So short
Yeah.
answer, we got a couple, but the topics were super interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's the power of those kind of meetings, conferences, whatever you want to call them, is that they've already got a invested
Mm.
interest. So that, like you said, the population might be quite low, but you can tell that you've all got a little bit of skin in the game. That everybody that you're talking to there is interested in some way, shape, or form.
Totally. Yeah.
Guy, for those people that don't know, maybe we'll jump into a conclusion. Do you want to describe what you do and how you do it?
Yeah, so I run a company called Charisma.ai. We have been going for 10 years now. It was our 10th anniversary this year, which puts us in, Jurassic Park territory in a lot of the AI world. But you know what? It was born, our sort of origin story was born from, funnily enough, the entertainment industry. We were doing projects when I was living in Australia for a while with TV networks, looking to bring the characters from those shows, whether they were soap operas or detective series or whatever, um, to life, so that viewers could talk to them and go on a journey, a narrative journey. So if it was Sherlock Holmes, you would go on that journey with him as one of his sidekicks to solve a case. And he would speak to you, and you could speak back to, in this instance, it was the BBC version with Benedict Cumberbatch as Sherlock. And what you're doing is you're immersed in that story. You feel you're part of it, and by speaking, it's not just a question of asking them questions like a chatbot. You're properly in that story. So we set up Charisma to make the creation of those stories really, really easy. To make them so that production companies could do it in a way that would be cost efficient, because we found that it was really hard to do. So we built a system to do it. That then extended from entertainment out into training, sort of corporate training, and then out into healthcare.
Yeah, I mean, the natural progression of it all. I mean, it just takes one person to say, actually, this has got a real application in this one. This could be used over here to give you all these ideas. I mean, the one that I saw was the Steppenwolf one
Oh
on
yeah.
YouTube. So my research went down that line. But yeah, I can see why people would find that really interesting, being able to speak to these characters and almost bring them to life. You did say you've been doing this for 10 years. I mean, there's been a lot of boom lately about AI, and especially within our simulation space
Mm,
of people creating all these
mm.
AI large language models and this kind of stuff. It's only just come into the public domain. Has that been around for 10 years? Then it's just that people haven't really known much about communication with AI.
Well, to a degree. So AI is a really broad umbrella. It's a really broad term. It's like
Mm,
saying planets without
yeah.
defining what every planet is. And you go, oh look, there's Mars, and you think, oh, I could live there. No, you can't,
No.
because that planet's specific. And so within that, 10 years ago, the two areas we were focused on were natural language processing, the ability to for a system to understand natural language, rather than typing something in or pressing buttons yes and no, and machine learning in the sense that the computers are able to learn about a particular topic or a particular subject. Then when ChatGPT, or specifically OpenAI, came into the fore, it was GPT 3.5, which was the one that everyone went, bloody hell, this is going to be interesting, up into ChatGPT in, I think, November 2022. But that's the point where I think it hit public perception and understanding and interest. And suddenly this thing went from a latent group of folks like me and various others who were like, this is going to be really important, up into mainstream worldwide. So it has been around for a while, and I think where we're at now is an interesting space where things like ChatGPT, they're very general, right? So you can type in anything and you're going to get back a response, but that response may not be correct for the particular use case that you want. So, uh, whereas what we've been focusing on is a very deep niche, and it was brought home to me with a presentation I saw a couple of years ago. And this guy who was working on training modules for surgeons, and he had asked ChatGPT, "Okay, I am a surgeon. Please give me the detailed process that you go through for an endoscopy." And then he got back this incredibly confident response. We're like, "First, you do this."
Mm,
He said, "By the time I reached the fifth step, I would have killed the patient if I'd done that."
yeah.
And largely that's because these models are so general. So for us, I think part of the unique selling point that we've had since since that time has been to make sure that you can control the simulation and make sure that it does what you set out to make it do, and it doesn't go off and hallucinate around tricky areas, which especially in uh, I would argue in corporate environments or medical or military or frankly anything. If you want to train someone about something or have a conversation about something, you want it to be correct.
Yeah, and you're right there. It makes people a little bit anxious, doesn't it? Especially with, well, anywhere, but specifically medicine. Because people want to get this right, don't they? They don't want any hallucinations or lies. They like to have that control over it. So, to draw things back a little bit, Charisma AI is a communication based software, are we saying? Is this, does it have to be installed, or is this a browser
Oh, it's browser based, absolutely.
browser
So,
based?
so think of it into as a two-sided coin. The first is a browser based, sort of almost like a browser based version of Word in some
Mm-hmm.
ways, where someone can write in the script that they want the characters to say, link up through nodes, boxes, um, the progress of that dialogue. So you say one line of dialogue, you link it to the next one, but then the magic starts to happen, which is the layering on of logic of functions. So, for example, and I often describe Charisma as a listening engine, the ability to listen for some particular thing that you want the user to say, and then the ability to track that. For example, if the conversation is wanting um, to go down a particular pathway and the user is not going down that pathway, we can add in these little counters and says, okay, if they don't go down the pathway once, that's fine. If they don't go down the pathway again, now we want to escalate it a little bit and say, Craig, you really need to go down this pathway. And if they
Yeah.
don't go down the third time, then we have a fail scenario. So it's like having a regular conversation, but then with a logic, almost like a gameplay piece on top of it, that allows that training to become better remembered. So
Mm-hmm.
the two sides are: one, the ability to enter it as to write the conversations and simulation in a really easy way, and then the other one is the engine that powers it, that actually
Okay.
sits, and that can be something which is from a user, can be online through a browser, can be a mobile app, can be a video game.
Okay, so if I read you right, say that I wanted to write my own kind of scenario, so I write the responses of a patient. I can put as much detail in there as I can. One, I've got time for. Two, I can be bothered. But then there's a little bit of a hybrid approach where AI partially takes over from the unexpected. So, because I can't obviously type in all the responses that this person could ever say, and you're always going to get the little people that try to almost beat the system. Let's see if let me ask him how they like their eggs in the morning and see what
Yeah,
kind of response I get from that. Because obviously, I wouldn't really have predicted that. I ain't got time to put that in. So you're saying AI almost helps with those kind of, the the
the
depth
edge
and the
cases.
breadth of the, yeah. Oh, so
Yeah,
that's really interesting.
we
Um,
we have a it's a node called a wildcard, which is
yeah.
where I call user says something else, and either you can direct that into snapping someone back into the main simulation, or you could riff and sort of invent around it depending on what you want to do. You mentioned Steppenwolf, who, for context, is part of the Warner Brothers Justice League franchise. He's a 7'6" alien intent on destroying our galaxy. So he's pretty grumpy. As a summary, if you asked him how he wants his eggs in the morning, you can imagine what sort of response you're going to get, and you should get that response. You shouldn't get something that says, "Well, actually, I prefer them poached." If you say that, you've blown the whole character. So the ability to have the appropriate response of that character, but also bring people into that into that space again, the learning space, or the conversational simulation space is important.
How hard is this to do? Let's just assume that I am a nurse or a doctor. I have no in-depth technical knowledge. I can't code, and I can work my way around a computer and that stuff. Do you think most people would be able to figure out how to create a scenario?
I think so. Oh, 100% yes, actually. I mean, what we find is that if someone it's a non-technical platform, right? I meant the analogy with Microsoft Word or something. We want it to be something like you're just writing it in, and then seeing it come to life, which is fun. But I think the key point, and the sort of the mindset that, say, that nurse needs to have, is that they need to be able to recall what those conversations have been, and almost in their own mind run the simulation to say, oh yeah, I had a patient who said this, or a lot of patients say this, and I want to be able to respond like that. um, and an example of that, one of the early projects we did was a simulation for medical practitioners for how to break bad news to patients. And as I'm sure a lot of the listeners will know, there is a way to do it that sort of follows the 5 stages of grief, and you want to be able to as a practitioner mirror the emotions that that patient is feeling at the moment. So if I say I'm terribly sorry your partner has a terminal illness, the first thing the patient's likely to say is, well, there must have been a mistake, because that's our natural response as a human. So a nurse will be able to know that. And they type in something like, no, there must have been a mistake. And then, that's then up to the practitioner to then respond to that, saying, no, I'm terribly sorry, there hasn't. So often, actually, the magic in this is it's not a technical magic. It's the ability for that person who's designing the conversation to know a bit about what the conversation is and then map that into our system.
So one of the things that I like to do, and sorry for this, but I always compare things like this to what I call real life simulation, so face to face simulation. So in my head, I'm now comparing a doctor or nurse going into a room with an actress or an actor who is then, just going to be about to be broken bad news. All right. So that for me is always the line in the sand. So
Mm.
instinctually, I always compare, an AI model or something like this. How is it going to differ from a real life experience? And the thing that comes to me straight away is, do you think would something like this be able to pick up on things like tone, empathy? Would it even be able to pick up on, am I being sarcastic? Am I making a joke? Can it pick up on those kind of nuances?
Um, so sometimes I do get asked, can it pick up sarcasm? And I go, yes, of course it can. As a result, you know, I so there are certain human nuances that are linguistic and very um, specific that are really hard to do. And I think we have to. What we can do is pick up on the nuances in text form, but not necessarily tonally of the space that that user is in. We infer it, but I think it comes down to the situation that is being designed. Now the thing about the real life actor, there are pros and cons there. The pros are obviously the ability to detect micro movements or whatever facial expressions but the problem is that if you're in a training scenario, those real life simulations are expensive. They don't scale because you're one to one with an actor, and you have to book them in. So for a nurse, to go in and book in something like that, for example, or any busy person, to book it in, say, okay, this is going to be 12 till 1 on a Thursday, and then suddenly an emergency comes in, you've just blown it. Whereas with Charisma, the advantage is, of course, you can do it whenever. You could do it from home, and it scales out to thousands. One simulation can scale out to thousands in a heartbeat, rather than that. So I think there are always going to be pros and cons. But I think that we are getting to a point now where the vast majority of standard cases are predictable, and you write them in. You write it into the script in such a way that what's going to happen. Again, back to your Steppenwolf case. If you ask Steppenwolf what eggs he wants in the morning, it's a bit like asking a nurse. If you're in a Breaking Bad news situation, and then someone asks about what diet they're on, you'd query that.
Mm. Where do you see this sitting within medicine? Do you think that there's a, because in my head I see it sitting with undergrad, before, in a university where, as you said, training to the masses. For instance, it could almost be issued out to them to do a little bit of homework where they can do it in their own time, maybe write a reflection. Where actually this probably wouldn't sit so well with maybe a consultant that is at the top of the game, where they've had loads of experience with communication and gone through this process. And do you see that's kind of where it sits?
I think it's across the whole thing, and the reason is that the research updates the whole time.
Mm,
Indeed, in any particular, what part of what we're finding is that with any in even one course on one specific module may well update. The theory behind it, the research, the practice may update once every 6 months or a year or whatever. So for someone to keep up to date and current with their learning and their practice, I think it applies as well, actually, to those well-established career practitioners in whatever form it is. We were doing some things around cybersecurity in the office, and um, as new, you know, WhatsApp style applications come onto people's phones, that training, that corporate training, needs to be updated to make it relevant. So this whole space is constantly being updated as new things come online. I mean, come the pandemic, there are suddenly the need to understand a whole different set of behaviors and criteria. Oh my God, it was an entire universe of knowledge that needed to be researched and then disseminated fast. I mean, that was an extreme example, but I do think it happens every day. So yes, to do those courses again for the young undergrads, grads, people who are on that very steep learning curve, that's going to be a huge impact. But equally, there's a heartbeat piece, I think, for regular practitioners to be updated on a regular basis.
So we went down a little bit of a rabbit hole. So we was there creating our little text, our responses for our patient, and that's the we'll call it the programming of the patient. How do we then link that to vocals? So we want to now put a voice onto that, and then we want to attach that to an avatar with lip sync. Is that still possible, or is that a different function?
No, I mean, it's one of the things we worked really hard over the years to do this, actually. And I'll tell you a story, which is that when we first started 10 years ago, AI voices were in their absolute infancy. There were a couple from Amazon, a couple from Google, but really that was it. And I went up to Edinburgh University to their informatics team and spoke to the guy who was consulting to Google and Amazon about their voices, and said, look, this is what we want to do. These sorts of things you want to do. And he's like, this is going to be really, really, futuristic and hard. So we decided to focus on our core, which is the ability to run the simulations and those conversations, and partner. And so very early on, in the first days, we partnered with the likes of 11 Labs, with the likes of Resemble, Google, Amazon, local dialect companies like Cereproc in the UK, and just integrated. So literally, if you've got a patient called Guy, say, who is the one you want to have, you could do it from a drop down menu. I've lost count, but it's somewhere between 3, 4, maybe 5,000 different voices. And then within each voice, select a particular tone of that voice to be faster, slower, higher, lower. Or you could create your own voice, because you may decide that I want to capture that particular dialect or have that in that person, and run it through one of the AI voice clones. So that's voices. Lip sync is really hard. We uh, we have again been partnering with companies in that space for the last 5, 6, 7 years, looking at how to get decent animation of the lips and the face. And really, it comes down to two things. One is, if it's pre-rendered, you can get a lot higher quality. So we can do a lot of work in the background to make this look believable, and that's the key thing. It doesn't have to be pixel perfect. It doesn't have to look like it's a photograph or a sort of high-end video on Netflix. As long as it's believable and the reactions are believable, actually we suspend disbelief as humans really easily. So the lip syncing is something we've worked on, and we've got both of those. So both voices and lip syncs as one of the little technical packages in our software development kits that comes with Charisma.
Yeah, like you say, you're in the right space to be talking about immersion and buy-in, because we go to quite an extreme in the simulation space to get people to believe that
Mm.
they're in. And do you find that people, once they start, they might be quite skeptical talking to an avatar, eye roll, but then after a couple of minutes of actually talking to them, you can almost see them. They've completely forgotten that they're talking to a cartoon or a character. Do you see that often?
Yes, and it's all down to how you script the first minute.
Yeah.
Literally, it's the first minute, and even within that, probably it's the first 10 seconds, where the opening lines. Um, need to be written, and the opening lines need to be human written to pull someone in. It's the equivalent to the first sort of car chase in a movie, or the first 15 minutes in a movie, which are critical, always, in the way that you tell a story. And there was an example we did for a Sky TV project where the scene opens up and there's this guy sitting uh, opposite you, sitting at a table opposite you, and his line is, "I bet you're wondering why you're here." And it's my favorite line that we've ever done, because it naturally, as someone who's about to do a course, whatever that course is, um, naturally that line needs to be sort of some form of psychological matching of your current state. And you're going to be curious, oh, I've got to do this training course. Oh, why am I here? You know, and so to have the character say, "I bet you're wondering why you're here," is a little bit of a, you know, not quite slap around the face, but it's like,
Yeah.
oh my God, you're pulling me in. And then you say yes. And he goes, "You're here because," I mean, this was it was a thriller. So he was quite a dominant character. So you say, "Yes, I am." And he says, "You're here because you're special." So the next step was to flatter them. And I think I touched on this on the call, but we get inspired a lot by two research fields. One is psychology, and the psychology of um, of conversation, of negotiation, of management, all of these sorts of things. And the other one's magic. Darren Brown, and the ability to create something to lure you in very quickly with one line, like, "Pick a card, any card." It's like,
Mm.
okay, and I'm in. So what if you think about that, just for folks listening, visualize that moment, visualize a magician opposite you with a pack of cards, and it's fanned out like this, and he says, "Pick a card, any card." What you do a couple of things straight away. The first thing is you lean in. You have to lean in, because the cards are closer, right? So you're already sort of psychologically leaning into the story. The second thing that you're doing is that you are suspending disbelief, and you believe that you could pick any card. It's a complete lie. The card that you've picked is preordained. So all of these things we mix together in those first couple of minutes, um, and those make you believe. But even then, I think the very fact that these are natural language conversations, we like to believe in them, and you can see that impact, for better for worse, in a lot of the chatbots that are out there at the moment, with people, my God, marrying them,
Mm.
falling in love with them. So these are powerful. These are powerful tools, and to use them ethically is something that we've always felt very strongly about. To make sure that, for example, if someone in this simulation uh, reveals information which could be let's just call it, raises alarm bells, whatever those alarm bells may be, then we need to make very sure that we handle it very correctly. And we were pioneering that 10, 15 years ago. Those safety nets of conversations need to be in there, because people do believe very, very easily.
Yeah, one of the things I've just wrote down there was psychological safety. It's very big in the simulation world, because we always want the what we call the participant to feel safe and accept that they're in a safe place to make mistakes.
Mm.
Is there a way of the AI, for lack of a better term, recognizing that the participant is struggling either emotionally, or just not really picking up the conversation and dealing with it well? Will it ever peel back to allow them, or give them hints and tips to help them on their journey, rather than flying off the handlebars? And although they might already be in a weakened state, getting angrier and angrier, because then they're not listening.
Oh yeah, I mean, absolutely. And there are many indicators we can watch for. It can be, for example, response times, and noting. There was an example, again, a useful one on that was an example a few years ago where a lot of companies had started using job interviewer chatbots, and the interview would run for let's say 30 minutes, and so there'd be a timer on there, and um, and you had, I think, maybe 30 seconds to answer a particular question. Now, for many people, that's okay, and it's a way to move the interview on. But for some neurodiversity uh, participants in that, neurodiverse participants in that, it presented a massive stress increase. So candidates were being ruled out because it said that they didn't answer the question, whereas in fact it was the concept of the timer and that was really throwing them. So, from our perspective, knowing that we can track how long it takes someone to answer a question can indicate whether or not they are having a problem with it, and then sending them down a particular branch in the dialogue tree that accommodates that. And it may then say, well, actually, maybe and whatever that conversation is and how it's been designed can then carry that safety net with it that I was talking about. I think incredibly important.
Yeah, I'll just what happens after a scenario? So, for instance, a participant goes through their communication and then they're finished. Is there anything like, does it track what they've said? Does that then get sent to an instructor, or what kind of happens after the whole scenario?
Well, there are two things. I think one is absolutely quantifying it. So, in other words, as I said, there is this wonderful gameplay layer within Charisma, which says um, if you have taken 3 goes to do one thing, or you've gone down a particular pathway, we can track it and then give it a score. So at the end, both the user and the course organizer can see those scores, and those are sort of fairly easy to do, easy to see. There's another way which we did with a in a VR training simulator to detect and train empathy amongst employees. And I won't go through the whole scenario, but it was a sort of in a vaguely stressful work environment, and it was a very open-ended conversation. And right at the end, what happens is that the responses that the participant has said are then aggregated and using AI summarized because in natural language. So it might say, "Guy, that you did very well in that simulation. Now, early on, you weren't showing much empathy towards the character, but actually that changed, and then your empathy levels increased, and you used words like X, Y, Z, whatever they were. Um, but probably 2/3 the way you want to redo that. Do you want to go back and redo it and try it again now, knowing this?" So, as well as having the numbers and a numerical feed that someone can test and get scored on, we can also do something that's a lot more natural language. And I think that those often create more of a connection with that participant. They understand, they're seeing that they're being listened to and understood, and not just being given a number.
All right, so they get a little bit of feedback at the end of it. Where does it grab all the feedback from? I assume it comes from wherever we want it to come from, protocols, guidelines, that kind of stuff.
Exactly, and the what we've always done, as we've done with the voices with language models, is to be able to select which language models you want. So for someone who is, I don't know, maybe it's some more light touch corporate client, they may want to use Google, or they may have a deal with Google, and that's fine. But in a more constrained environment, it may be a large language model that is hosted on an internal network and is very much more closed. You can just select that on a drop down, and we can target that and bring that in so that nothing goes out of the corporate environment.
I mean, what we're describing might seem quite high tech to most people. Is there a limitation on things like computers, Wi-Fi connections? Because the NHS, they don't have, well, they have terrible computers and terrible Wi-Fi connections. Is this a factor?
Um, I don't. No, because we've actually built it so that it's incredibly optimized for it. And what is being sent across the network are packets of text rather than anything, too onerous. It's pretty optimized, and part of that was having to develop on mobile phones, which are notorious as you may drop out of a signal range or out of a Wi-Fi zone. Um, we recently did a project with Spark DSL, the providers who do the in hospital movie situations to run a It's not actually a simulation. It's almost like a call center triage process, so that patients can sign up to movies in that. So I think we know the scenario that they're in, but yeah, we do not expect people to have the latest anything really. I mean, the good
Yeah,
news is also that things are speeding up, but no, we've always aimed for lowest common denominator because we have to.
well, that's good because we are the lowest common denominator for most things. All right. Hardest question of the day, then, Guy. How much does it cost?
So again, the, there's a bit of a superpower here, which is that because we developed our tech before generative AI. So here's the deal, right? What generative AI does, whenever you ask it anything, it pings off that thing to its generative AI server, and it has to generate the answer. That's the nature of its beast. Now that costs. So that means every time there is a bit of conversation, you've got to generate something which is costing money. For us, because we did it before, it's now turned into our superpower, which is that all you're doing is you're calling a bit of script, which is negligible. So for us, the sort of costs we are talking about, I think we move a decimal point away from what all of those large language models are. It's much cheaper, and often what we talk about is we try and optimize our models for the number of users use the number of um, calls that someone makes to the particular model. It's not a set. It's very transparent on our websites, and it's per that's what we charge per different scenario. But at the same time, I think we've always also worked out over the years that working with an organization like the NHS, variable cost models are tricky because you might have a budget that says I need to be within £2,000 a year, and that's my budget for a year. And for us, we can do that. We can come to the party and go, okay, we'll work with you within that. We know what your scenario is. We'll optimize your conversation that you've designed, and we can match it into that. So I like to think we've got a little bit of an edge on the big guys on that one.
All right, cool. So you can have like a pay-per-view token kind of thing, or maybe a license, depending on what your needs are.
Exactly
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
Do you do anything like demos, free trials? Are you looking to maybe work with some people who would like a partnership, those kind of things? What are you looking for?
We totally are. Yes. So let's just quantify those two. So one is the partnership model. Very often we work with companies that do conversation design or the visual look, because that's what they want to do. So they will build the web pages or the mobile apps or whatever, and we're the engine that powers the conversation. So we often find ourselves going alongside, walking shoulder to shoulder into an organization like the NHS to design a certain piece. And then in terms of the free trials, yeah, I mean, it's easy to sign up on Charisma.ai and have a pay as you go model, and literally, that's going to be a few quid to test it and see. And if it's the sort of thing that people want to use and they like it and they start to practice those simulations and building it out, that's when we go. Someone may say, right, this is good. Now we need to do this more formally. So, in other words, you can play with it at the weekends and do whatever you want, sort of just to test. But then, more formally, uh, we can go in through the dynamic purchasing system that we're on and included in on the NHS to do that more enterprise level support.
Yeah, well, thank you for that, Guy. As we know, the time has flown by, and we're coming to the end. Where do you think you'll be in 5, 10 years' time? What do you think? What kind of stuff do you think you'll be doing?
I really love doing what I'm doing. I really love it. We're good at it. We've been doing it for 10 years. And if someone had asked me 10 years ago, would I be doing the same thing? I'd probably say not. But um, I love seeing the work that people create on Charisma. I love seeing the simulations, going through them, and then supporting them on it. Um, this world is changing so fast. In a career of, like, I've been doing this for sort of 30 odd years, and I've never seen things so move so fast. But the constant at the end of it is that good ideas and how we connect the technology to humans always is the one thing that that shines through. So we'll always have that space. And I think the way in which these simulations work, you're simulating things which matter, and that will carry on. So in some ways, we might be in a land of robot simulations, cool, but we're still going to be simulating interactions with humans, and I love that.
Yeah, it's very easy to forget why, especially within NHS, why we do these kind of things. It's all nice having all these toys and stuff, but remember that we're here for patients at the end of the day. We're trying to make things better, and sometimes it's really easy to lose the why. Sometimes. All right, Guy. How do people get hold of you if they want to know more?
Really easy. Charisma.ai is the website. My email is guy@charisma.ai. Feel free to reach out.
Yeah, I'll put all your information in the contact information of this podcast. So feel free to contact either myself or Guy, and we'll put you in touch. Guy, thank you very much for coming today and talking to me. I'm
Thank you.
hoping that maybe we can think about our phase 2, where actually you can come on and maybe we'll do a bit of a video podcast where you can maybe demonstrate some of the stuff that we've been talking about today.
I know, and maybe I've been the avatar all this time. Who knows?
Oh, that would be All right, Guy. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Craig.
And that brings us to the end of this episode of the SimTech podcast. A huge thank you to Guy from Charisma.ai for taking the time and sharing his insights into AI-driven avatars, communication-based simulation, and what it really takes to create believable virtual human interactions. If you've enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing and sharing it with colleagues in simulation community. And if you're working on something innovative in simulation, whether that's AI, VR, or something completely different, I'd love to hear from you. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time on the SimTech podcast.